David Grant was a respected geology expert, and I was only a farm woman with a high school education. We had been married for 40 years, and for 35 of those years, he was dissatisfied with our marriage. After he died suddenly, I finally had control of the remote and time that belonged only to me. Every day I watched the soap operas David used to say were meaningless, and ate at street stalls he always called garbage. On my 65th birthday, I ordered myself a durian mill crepe cake and celebrated my first birthday that belonged solely to me. Just as I was about to make a wish, my long-estranged daughter called. "Mom, today would have been Dad's 67th birthday. Don't forget to fry some of those little yellow croakers he loved." "Oh, we already went to the cemetery with Uncle and Aunt, so you don't need to go. No sense making him unhappy down there." When the call ended, I sat for a long time in a house so quiet it almost rang in my ears. After a while, I lit the candles and made the only wish I have ever made with solemn sincerity. If I could live it over again, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with David Grant. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the day David first came to our village. Someone patted me twice between the shoulder blades. I jerked my head up. "What are you spacing out for, girl? Hurry up and pick one to take home." I glanced back at Joe's dark face, and those strikingly white teeth at the low houses in front of me, and the familiar faces clustered in 2s and 3s all around. I knew with absolute clarity that my wish had come true. I had really gone back to the day David and that batch of college students arrived in our village. After the college entrance exams were reinstated, many educated youths got into university and returned to the paths their lives should have taken. Because of the unique landforms around here, David Grant, who studied geological exploration, and his classmates were sent by their school to our village for field work. But the houses prepared for them had just been swept away by a mudslide. So the village chief told every family whose home hadn't been damaged to clear out a room for these students. David's group had nearly 20 people, and only 2 were women. In my previous life, because I was late getting the house ready, I could only choose from whoever was left and ended up taking home David, who looked decent and honest. And that was how my ill-fated tie with him began. Seeing both female students already being led off by village aunties, I hurried forward, took the arm of Aunt Ruth, who lived next door, and said, "My dad's out restocking goods and I don't know when he'll be back. Let this young lady come stay with me." Aunt Ruth paused but didn't refuse. "All right, ask if she's willing to go with you." The one she'd picked was named Megan Lane. Unlike the other girl, who left no impression on me, Megan had been David's colleague for decades in my last life. When the affair between David Grant and Ann Blake became the talk of the town, Megan spoke up for me, indignant at the unfairness. Straightforward as she was, Megan didn't turn me down. After a simple introduction, she grabbed her luggage and followed me home. Though decades had passed, I'd walked that road home countless times in my dreams. I forced the joy and excitement of getting to live it again deep down. After I showed Megan into the room I'd prepared, I sat in the shabby little general store and drifted through old memories. "Hi, could you get me a bar of soap?" The voice from my memories made me freeze. I looked up and met the gaze of a David Grant who was decades younger. Seeing me sit there dumbly, he waved a hand in front of my eyes. "Hello." The scent of soap, mixed with the dampness in the air, brought me back. I picked up a bar from the counter and handed it to him. "What's your name? Have we met before?" he asked. Seeing the confusion and curiosity in his eyes, I kept my face cold. "Lots of people look like me. My name is none of your business." David gave an awkward little laugh and walked off, looking back every few steps. From the moment I heard his voice, my heart had been beating out of rhythm. I was afraid David, like me, had been reborn. But then I remembered what he'd said the day before his sudden death. "Lynn Parker, the biggest regret of my life was marrying you. You ruined my life with Anne." If he'd carry memories from the last life, maybe that would be a good thing. Because of a torrential rainstorm, the road connecting our village to the outside world was washed out, and my father didn't make it back with his new stock until the evening of the 3rd day. After greeting Megan, he called me into his room. "I hear a few of those college boys are quite good looking. He'd better seize the chance and get things settled before they leave." My mother passed away early, and Xants were his prey. And after turning down 7 or 8 women who wanted to be my stepmother, my father raised me on his own. Maybe it was because he always felt I hadn't really grown up. Or maybe because he couldn't bear the thought of me marrying too soon and leaving home. By the time the girls my age in the village were all married with children, my father finally began to worry about my marriage. The new marriage law had just gone into effect at the start of the year, and I had turned 20 only 2 months earlier. During that time, my father had met with matchmakers from all the nearby towns and villages, but he wasn't satisfied with any of the men they introduced. In my previous life, because David Grant was living in our house, my father happened to come home from a supply run and see him helping me clean the courtyard. Learning that David was educated, quick to notice what needed doing, and from a city household, and that he had an older brother serving in the army, my father became interested. He went out of his way to create opportunities for the two of us to be alone together. David had never dated before, and during his stay in our village, he fell sick once. I was the one who cared for him the whole time. So not long after his group of college students returned, David came back with his parents to propose marriage. For the first few years after we married, things between us were actually quite good. He knew how to charm people and always brought me little trinkets after work. When our daughter was born, he was overjoyed, saying I was the pride of the Grant family because they preferred having girls. But everything changed after David returned from a 6-month exploration mission. The assignment had been grueling, and after coming back, he often shut himself in his study. He no longer told me stories about what happened in the field, and I couldn't understand the complicated emotions in his eyes when he looked at me. Noticing that he was eating far less than before, I worried about his health. I tore out the flowers in our once colorful courtyard and planted vegetables and fruit instead, even keeping 2 chickens in one corner. Wanting to enrich the soil and unable to find where to buy fertilizer, I started making compost in the yard myself. That little project caused quite a stir in the residential compound, and it led to our first big fight. At the time, I couldn't understand what I had done wrong when all I wanted was to take care of his health. Then I met Ann Blake in person. After being transferred to David's workplace, Ann visited our home once. She knocked while I was in the middle of fertilizing the vegetable patch. Our 4-year-old daughter ran to answer the door and then went strangely quiet. Sensing something was wrong, I stepped out and saw David standing at the doorway with Ann, their heads close together. Speaking softly, even after all these decades, I can still clearly remember that day. Ann was wearing a white dress and had her hair in 2 braids. A light fragrance drifted from her, carried on the breeze, pushing away some of the earthy smell from the yard. Suppressing the odd feeling in my chest, I was about to invite Ann inside. But before I could speak, David clamped a hand over his nose, grabbed Ann's arm and took 2 steps back. "Can't you smell how awful you are? You actually want to invite someone in like this. Aren't you embarrassed?" Our daughter, also holding her nose, inched closer to Ann and said shyly, "Mommy stinks, but Auntie smells nice." That was the first time I truly felt the sting of embarrassment and humiliation, and I finally understood why David had gotten angry over the composting. He thought I was making him lose face in the compound. He regretted marrying a coarse country woman like me. I had put in all that effort for his health, only to be thoroughly despised in return. "Dad, I heard the city's food factory is hiring. I want to give it a try." No rush to get married, I told my father. Our village was better off than most in the surrounding area, and thanks to my father's years of connections and savings, he had opened the first and only general store in the village. Because we never had to worry about food or clothing, my father wasn't like other parents who sent their children out to earn money early to help the family. He was determined to find me a husband with good prospects, afraid I might suffer after marriage in ways I'd never suffered growing up. But what he couldn't understand was that sometimes the pain in your heart is far harder to endure than any physical hardship. Sure enough, when he heard I wanted to work, his first reaction was to refuse. "The family doesn't need you to earn money. You're not getting any younger, and if we wait too long, people will laugh at you." In the 6th year of my marriage to David Grant, my father died in an accident on his way to visit me. Back then, I had just learned about David Grant's unusual relationship with Ann Blake. On top of that, my father's sudden death sent me into an emotional spiral, and I lost the baby that had only just begun to form. My uterus was damaged, and I could never conceive again. In this new life, the feeling of being given a second chance reached its peak when I saw the deep care and love on my father's face. I stepped forward and burrowed into his arms. "Dad, life is long. I don't want to get married too soon. I want to see how far I can go on my own. My father finally agreed to let me go out and try my wings. In my past life, I hadn't understood. I thought graduating from high school was already a fine education. But after spending my whole life as a housewife, I realized that if you want to succeed, you have to strengthen yourself. No matter what I might want to do in the future, I still needed to keep studying. I truly wanted to work at the food factory, but what I didn't tell my father was that once I got settled, I planned to enroll in night school. Megan Lane's older sister worked at the food factory, and through her introduction, I learned the usual requirements for getting hired there. Time flew, and before I knew it, I had been back for nearly 20 days. One afternoon, Megan came running in, looking flustered. I quickly asked what had happened. One of the guys suddenly came down with a fever. I brought some medicine with me when I came. Let's see if any of it will help. Before she finished speaking, she had grabbed a small bag and hurried back out. I had a suspicion and glanced at the wall calendar. Sure enough, it was the same day in my last life when David Grant had been bitten by a rat. Back then, I had just begun to feel a little fond of him thanks to my father's matchmaking. So when I noticed something was off with him in the morning, I immediately helped take him to the hospital with my father. But this time, David was staying at Grandma Zhang's house in the village. She was elderly, living with her unmarried, lame son, and their lives were hard. Naturally, they wouldn't notice the early signs of his condition. I looked away from the calendar and pushed the matter to the back of my mind. When Megan came back, she told me what had happened to David. Luckily, someone in the village recognized it. He'd been bitten by a rat. The doctor said if they'd brought him any later, it might have been too late. I may have hated David, but I didn't wish him dead. I just listened idly as Megan recounted the events of the day. The next day was the food factory's recruitment day. I left early for the city, wandered around after the written test, and didn't head back until the afternoon. When I saw David waiting at the bus stop, I was surprised. His face was pale, and he looked utterly drained. After getting off the bus, I glanced at him once, then turned away to walk home. But his next words froze me in place. "Zizzy, you came back early, didn't you? You knew this would happen to me. Why did you warn me? Do you know I almost died yesterday?" I turned back and looked at him strangely. "Are you talking to me? Who's Zizzy?" Before he met Anne, David had always called me Zizzy. After he fell for her, he either addressed me by my full name or as Mrs. Grant. Seeing my expression, he started to say more. David didn't believe what I said, but he couldn't explain why, so he could only watch as I walked away. After that day, I was even more careful to avoid any of the college students, except Megan. On the day the food factory posted the written test results, I went to the city again. Seeing my name on the list of those who had passed, I let out a breath of relief. The interview would be in 2 days. When I got home, I brought some pastries I'd bought in the city over to Megan's room to thank her and her sister for their help. Megan, holding the pastries, looked embarrassed. "Lynn, this is too much. Tomorrow I'll call my sister and ask her what you should watch out for in the interview." That was exactly what I was hoping to hear. But I didn't expect that when Megan made the call, David overheard. On the day of the interview, he blocked me on the road and stopped me from getting on the bus. "Lynn Parker, why are you pretending you don't know me? It wasn't like this last time. You've never worked a day in your life. You can't handle this kind of hardship." David's voice was loud enough to draw the attention of many people on the bus. Feeling all those eyes on me, I frowned. I shoved David Grant away. "Are you out of your mind? Why do you keep saying these strange, ridiculous things? If you keep bothering me, I'll call the police and report you for harassment." In this era, being accused of harassment was a serious charge. Even if David hadn't actually done anything over the line, with my testimony and so many witnesses, it wouldn't end well for him. My words made the faces of those who had assumed we were close turned pale. Seeing this, David could only swallow his anger and watch me get on the bus, then watch the bus pull away. Maybe someone had said something to my father about what happened that morning, because when I got home, he told me he had gone to speak with David's supervising professor. "Don't be afraid, sweetheart. As long as I'm here, no one will dare to bully you." I hadn't been afraid in the first place, but his words still warmed me deeply. Maybe this second life came with some extra blessing from above, because I passed the interview without a hitch and was hired at the food factory. The factory had dormitories, but new employees had no chance of getting one. Luckily, with Megan Lane's sister helping me, I found a small room to rent near the factory. The rent was cheap, and after paying it, I still had plenty left from my monthly salary. Once everything was settled, I called my father and gave him my address in the city. Then, without wasting a second, I went to the night school and enrolled. The moment I signed my name on the admission form, I felt lighter all over, as if the invisible thread that had bound me since my rebirth had finally snapped. I was walking down a completely different path from my last life. On my first day off, I brought a bottle of liquor home from my father. Seeing how much more spirited I was compared to before, he had a rare extra couple of drinks. After washing the dishes, I returned to the courtyard and saw him looking up at the moonlight. "Do you see her?" He murmured softly. "Our daughter's grown up now. Don't worry, as long as I'm here, I'll never let her be wronged." Megan, leaning against the doorway, whispered to me, "Your dad is the most devoted man I've ever seen. I hope I can find someone who loves me like that someday." I just smiled without answering. Once I'd thought the same thing. That's why, after confirming my feelings for David, I'd been so happy, and why I was in disbelief when I found out he had fallen for someone else. Even though my father's devotion to my mother had brought him plenty of gossip, growing up in that kind of home, it had never crossed my mind that my own marriage would run into trouble so soon after it began. In my past life, I'd been trapped in marriage for an entire lifetime. In this one, I would never let myself fall into the same fate again. I had thought that once David's internship ended, we wouldn't have any reason to meet again. But one evening after night school, I ran into him outside the school gates. As soon as he saw me, he cut straight to it. "You're even taking classes." "Lynn Parker, what are you trying to do?" Because I'd stayed behind to ask the teacher a few questions. There weren't many people around when I left. Noticing no one was watching, David dropped his restraint. "Just admit it, you've been reborn too, haven't you?" I didn't know why. When in his last moments of the previous life he had regretted marrying me, David now kept obsessing over whether I'd been reborn. But now that I had a stable job and clear goals, I wanted to make things completely clear between us. "Yes, I have." "So what?" "In the last life, you regretted marrying me, and I regretted marrying you. Since we've both been given a second chance, you should go after what you missed instead of coming to me again and again to make yourself feel important." David stared at me for a long time before speaking. "How can you say that? What right do you have to regret marrying me? I never made you work a single day. I fed you, clothed you, and never let you suffer. You're a rural woman who never even went to college. Yet my students called you professor's wife, and everyone who knew us called you Mrs. Grant. All the status and benefits you enjoyed were because of me. What right do you have to regret it?" His face was red and his neck bulging with anger. But hearing his accusations, I only found it laughable. The further our marriage went, the wider the gulf between us grew. He stopped wanting to come home. He spent all his time either out leading exploration teams or staying in the school dorms. Everyone said he was dedicated and hardworking, holding him up as a role model. But no one knew how hard it was for me, raising our daughter alone while also taking care of his parents, because he was never home. From the time you turned 40, only half of your monthly salary ever reached me. Your parents needed money for medical bills and medicine, or daughter needed money for school. And on top of that were the daily expenses. Every month I pinched and scraped, and by the end of the year, I still couldn't save enough to buy myself a single new dress. In my previous life, the day after rumors about David Grant and Ann Blake spread, my father died in an accident. Not long after, I miscarried and damaged my health. David's parents forced him to kneel at my hospital bed and promise that I would be his only wife for the rest of his life. Maybe the gossip made his days at the university difficult, or maybe it was a remnant of conscience, but he agreed. He really never mentioned Anne's name again, and to avoid suspicion, she even requested a transfer to another workplace. But after Anne's husband died, David secretly reconnected with her. He gave half of his salary to Anne and her child, and he spent all his free time keeping them company. By the time our daughter was 4, she already knew her parents' relationship wasn't good. When she was 17, she saw with her own eyes that her father, who had claimed he couldn't attend her birthday party because he was too busy, was actually eating with a boy younger than her. After being caught, David didn't even try to rein himself in. He claimed, with righteous conviction, that he was only helping Anne and her son get through a difficult time, called me petty, and accused me of filling our daughter's head with unhealthy ideas. At the same time, he dumped his parents entirely on me, dressing it up as my duty as a daughter-in-law. If it hadn't been for the fact that his parents had always treated me well, and that I couldn't bear to see the elderly couple who had already lost their eldest son, abandoned by their younger one, I might have taken my daughter and left long ago. The first year, David gave half his salary to Anne. Life was incredibly hard for me, the child, and his parents. His older brother had died in the line of duty protecting a comrade, and his widow had taken half of the pension and remarried with their child. The other half of the pension was taken by David under the excuse of research needs. At our worst, the four of us survived for a whole week on porch, so thin you could hardly see the rice and coarse grain buns. Meanwhile, David and Anne were seen eating every meal at a stay-toned restaurant. One New Year's, when David finally came home after a long absence, he saw that there was no festive atmosphere in the house, and that I was wearing clothes so faded they'd turned white. Right there in front of our child and his parents, he scolded me for not knowing how to manage a household. His father grabbed a belt and started beating him. Our daughter cried and told him how hard the year had been, and his mother cursed him out. I, expressionless, met his gaze evenly. That was the first time I ever saw guilt in his eyes. Maybe it was my longing for a harmonious marriage, or maybe it was my father's influence. But after David admitted he was wrong, I softened again. And so I spent my life with him. I don't know when it happened, but eventually the daughter who once resented Anne ended up on David's side. I only know that the first time I heard my daughter accuse me of embarrassing both her and her father, my heart broke. David thought I was unsophisticated, someone who only made him lose face. Even the daughter I had raised by myself became dissatisfied with me, saying I only cared about our tiny plot of land at home and wasn't like her Aunt Anne, who was always the center of attention wherever she went, an example and guiding light for her. My husband didn't love me, my daughter despised me, and out of sheer spite toward them and even toward myself, I stayed married to David, making sure that he and Anne could never openly be together until the day they died. After a brief review of my muddled last life, I looked at David with ice in my eyes. A live-in made for your whole family despised and ordered around my whole life. What makes you think I should be grateful for that garbage of a life? Without waiting to hear whatever he said next, I turned and walked away. The days that followed were simple and repetitive. I went back and forth between 2 points every day. After all, it had been decades since I was in high school, and I had forgotten most of what I'd learned. But I wasn't willing to give up. I believed I could do it. Outside of my working hours, I didn't waste a single minute. If I wasn't reading, I was working through practice problems. I had no intention of staying at the food factory forever. Working while reviewing was mainly to earn some money, so I could bring my father to live in the city. During this time, I made it a point to learn about city prices and where small businesses could set up shop. Not far from the food factory, there was a free market where my father could easily run a stall and keep selling goods. Life in the village wasn't bad, but in my previous life, my father had never truly enjoyed a day of comfort. In this second chance, I didn't want to miss any opportunity to change his way of living. I wanted him to see more of the world. After learning that it was best to get an individual business license before setting up a stall, I went home on one of my days off. At that time, the government neither encouraged nor discouraged private business. So to be safe, I wanted to see if my father could find someone to help process the paperwork. When he heard my plan, my father stayed quiet for a long moment. Afraid he might refuse to move to the city with me, I decided to play my trump card. Dad, I'm planning to take the college entrance exam next year. I go to night school every day now, and I get out pretty late. A while back, I was even cornered by a punk. Before I could finish, my father slammed the table. Of course we'll go. My daughter's working hard to move forward. How could I hold you back? Tomorrow, I'll go into the city with you. Let's get that business license sorted right away. My father had been in the army, and after retiring, he stayed in touch with comrades who worked in various fields. Hearing his words, I knew I'd already won half the battle to get him to live in the city. When I first moved there, money was tight, so the place I rented was just big enough for myself. With my father's agreement, I quickly asked around for a larger place, ready for him to move in as soon as the paperwork was done. The new place I found wasn't far from Megan Lane's home, and she happened to see me negotiating with the landlord. "Lynn, are you moving here?" When I nodded, Megan's face lit up. "That's great. Now I can come see you often. You have no idea how much gossip I've been saving up with no one to tell." People in those days were more reserved, keeping most things to themselves. Megan was 2 years older than me, and back when she lived in my home, she had already told me plenty of stories about her classmates. Stories her sister didn't want to hear, and others couldn't relate to. Without David Grant in my life, everything seemed to be going smoothly. My father's business license was approved, and in my 5th month back in this time, he moved in with me in the city. He didn't close the village store, but left it in the hands of someone trustworthy. He had his own plans. Once the license was ready, he wanted to rent a small shop. Having retired from the army due to business experience, my father had received a sum of money from the state, and he'd made the most of it over the years. This gave him some confidence to open a shop in the city. But after looking around and learning about the rental costs in the market situation, he began to have second thoughts. That was when I handed him all the money I'd saved and told him my plan. Dad, don't worry too much about the money, and thinking of quitting my job, that way we'll have the startup funds for the shop. And I can also help you during the opening phase. My father's skills were good, and from experience, I suggested he start with a small snack shop. With recipes decades ahead of their time and affordable prices, the shop drew attention right from the start. Worried it would interfere with my studies. Once business settled into a steady rhythm, my father hired someone to help, so I could focus completely on reviewing. During this time, Megan shared a lot of gossip with me, including some about David. Remember that guy who got bitten by the rat? When I nodded, she went on. I don't know what got into him, but a while ago, he insisted on joining a brand new exploration team in the neighboring province. He wasn't even there for a month before he made a fuss about coming back. Whenever our teachers mentioned him to the places he could have worked, they just shake their heads. The place Megan mentioned was exactly Anne Blake's hometown. It seemed clear. David Grant had made up his mind to go there early, so he could meet her ahead of time. What I couldn't figure out was why he suddenly demanded to come back so soon. A few days later, Megan came to me with more gossip, and piecing it together with my memories from the previous life, I understood the whole reason. The truth was, David couldn't stay there any longer. In my last life, when David met Anne, he had already made a name for himself. Anne had ignored the fact that he was married and taken the initiative to get close, hoping to secure herself a better life. But in this life, David was just a freshly graduated college student with no power or influence. When he found Anne, he happened to see her walking with a man. He didn't take the man seriously, assuming Anne would melt the moment she saw him and treat him with the same gentle attentiveness she had in the past. He didn't know that the man was Anne's childhood sweetheart, and David's sudden appearance had interrupted a hard-earned chance for them to spend time together. David tried to get Anne to leave with him, but she not only refused. She and that man spoke to him with open hostility. David thought she was only cold because she didn't know him yet, hadn't seen the charm of him at work. So after Anne reported to the exploration team, David made another move to approach her. This time, she reported him to the team leader. The area where that new exploration team was based was small, and everyone there knew each other. Naturally, they didn't take kindly to such arrogant behavior from an outsider. David was pushed out until he couldn't function there anymore, and in the end, he had to beg his professor to transfer him back. Around that time, several snowfalls left ice on the roads. Worried my father might slip on his way to pick me up, I told him I'd walk home with a classmate who lived near me, so he didn't need to come. That day after class, I heard people talking about someone outside the school gate who looked like they were about to freeze into an ice sculpture, but still wouldn't leave. Fearing it was my stubborn father, I quickened my pace toward the gate. Peering through the crowd and seeing the man's shoulders covered in snow, I let out a breath of relief. It wasn't my father. I turned toward home, but then I heard someone calling my name. When I looked back, the ice sculpture was slowly making his way toward me. When he was about 2 meters away, I recognized him. It was David Grant. Snow had piled on his shoulders, and even his eyebrows and eyelashes were tipped with ice. "What is it now?" I asked, my voice cold as stone. David rubbed his face hard and muttered, "Lynn, we need to talk." In weather like this, who would want to stand outside chatting with him? I didn't even bother to look at him again before turning to leave. Seeing that, David hurried forward to grab my hand, but the ground was too slick, and in one misstep, he slipped and slid several meters before stopping. A passerby helped him up. He could barely stand, clutching his waist and trembling as he said, "Lynn Parker, aren't you going to help me?" When he got no reply, he looked up, only to see I was already gone. Far enough, he couldn't even catch sight of me. The next night's school session was a rest day, so I went to help my father at the snack shop. Megan stopped by after work and brought me another piece of gossip. Remember that guy who got bitten by the rat? He's got new trouble. He actually broke his tailbone. He's in the hospital now. Yesterday, I'd heard something heavy hit the ground, and I'd guessed David had fallen, but I hadn't expected the fall to be so bad. Honestly, Megan went on, I think there's something about that guy. A person can't be this unlucky, unless he's either run into something unclean or he's got some kind of problem himself. I should probably keep my distance from him. Her words caught my attention. In my last life, while David was contemptible in relationships, he had strong professional skills, respected by both colleagues and students. In this life, even though he was still young, if he worked steadily like before, he should have been able to achieve the same level of success. But ever since the rat bite, David had changed. He interrupted his teachers during exploration trips, always eager to show off, completely different from the modest man he once was. And now, after causing a scene about joining another exploration team and pulling strings to get transferred back, he'd left many people dissatisfied. In my past life, David Grant had become a respected geology expert. In our country, David Grant had once stood at the very top of his field. He had the experience and knowledge, so it was only natural for him to make a few comments when faced with exploration methods from decades ago. But he used the wrong approach. Right now, he was just a newly graduated student with almost no experience. How could he treat his teachers the way he had treated his students in the last life? At this point, I truly felt grateful to heaven for giving me another chance. My life was only getting better, while David seemed to be heading toward the ending that belonged to him all along. That year's New Year celebration was a happy one for both my father and me. He was enjoying the freshness and new hope in his life, while I was glad I hadn't wasted this second chance. After the new year, only a few months remained before the college entrance exams. Even on my days off, my father wouldn't let me help at the snack shop. Instead, he urged me to walk around and relax. One day, passing by the house I had lived in for many years in my previous life, I looked up and met the gaze of a woman coming out the door. It was David's mother, much younger now. At this time, David's older brother hadn't yet been born. Seeing that she looked well, I shifted my gaze and kept walking without slowing down. Night school could only teach so much, and when I found that some questions couldn't be answered by the teachers there, I simply stopped going. Instead, whenever Megan could explain something to me, I studied with her directly. Maybe it was my determination to stay focused on my studies that kept me from seeing David at all, up until the college entrance exams. With Megan's occasional help, my grasp of the material grew stronger. During the 3 days of the exams, I felt strangely detached. It wasn't until I finished the last subject that I finally felt the reality of having taken the Gaokao. Megan had been very accurate in estimating her scores back when she took the exams, so even though years had passed, I couldn't think of anyone more reliable to help me. My memory was sharp. I could clearly recall every answer I had written. Together, we went over the answers twice without stopping. Megan looked at me in disbelief. Lynn, you've improved so fast. If you'd taken the Gaokao back then, you would have definitely gotten into a good university. Looking at the calculated score on the paper, I felt excited too, but I only smiled at her words. I knew that back then, I couldn't have scored even half of what I did now. It was both my unwillingness to accept my old fate and my determination to make use of this second chance that had driven me to fight so hard to change my destiny. Taking my scores and the needs of the coming decades into account, I chose to major in finance. In my past life, while managing a large household, I had discovered my sensitivity to numbers. This time, I had deliberately increased my practice with math problems and found I truly had a knack for it. Money wasn't the most important thing, but having so often wronged myself because of a lack of it in the past had made me fixated on earning. I wanted to make a lot of money, enough for my father and me to live a life we had never even dared to dream about before. After submitting my application, I turned my attention back to my father's snack shop. After a few days of observation, I saw that the shop already had regular customers, so I began helping my father develop new items. One day, while I was cleaning the shop, someone asked if we could still make something to eat. Looking up, I saw it was David's mother. I froze for a moment, then put on a smile. "Sorry, we've sold out for the day." The look in her eyes was exactly the same as the one David had given me the first time we met in this life. She hesitated several times as if wanting to say something, but seeing that I was busy, she said nothing and left quietly. What I didn't know was that, after that brief meeting, she dreamed of me twice, but each time she woke, she couldn't remember what had happened in the dream. Only that when she saw me again, she felt an odd sense of loss. I was admitted to my first-choice university. When my father learned that the school was more than 500 kilometers from home, he was both happy and reluctant to let me go. After dropping me off, seeing his lingering gaze, I pointed to the still-developing snack street outside the campus. "Dad, why don't you come here too? College students buy snacks way more often than the neighbors around our current shop. If you set up a stall here, business will definitely be good." When my father had first followed me to the city, he'd left the village store in the care of someone he trusted. Now, nearly a year later, the convenience store in the village was doing well. After paying the monthly salary to the person running it, my father still received an extra sum of money. With that precedent in mind, when he heard my suggestion, his interest was piqued again. "The store doesn't hold much real value," he said. "Having someone watch over it is no problem. But the food at the snack shop, that's something you developed bit by bit. If we hand it to someone else, won't it affect our business?" His concern wasn't without reason, but I had already decided who I wanted for the job. In both my past life and this one, Megan had helped me immensely. After a year of knowing her and her family, I had a good grasp of their personalities and habits. While Megan's older sister had a stable job at the food factory, I knew that more than 10 years from now, she would be laid off. In my past life, Megan had told me that after her sister lost her job, she divorced her husband and raised 2 children alone, struggling terribly. Though the layoff wave was still years away, we could start laying the groundwork now. Megan's mother was younger than my father, but their whole family squeezed into a small place. Even though both daughters had decent jobs, money was still tight. I had never figured out the right way to repay Megan for all her help. But when I saw the snack street outside my school, the idea came to me. My mother had passed away early, and my father was my only family. In my previous life, before I could even fulfill my duty as a daughter, he was gone. This time, I wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. My father knew how much Megan and her family had helped me in finding work and getting into college. After hearing my idea, he thought for a while, then made up his mind. "I've met Megan's parents. They're honest people who know how to run a household. I'll go talk to them. You should call Megan first and see what she thinks." After putting my father on the train, I called Megan's workplace directly. I got straight to the point, and for a long moment she said nothing. Thinking the signal was bad, I called her name a few times before hearing her choked voice. "Lynn, I'm just so moved. Are you really planning to hand your family's snack shop over to my parents? You don't know. My sister's child was seriously ill a short while ago. Her husband's family never liked girls, and when the child got sick, they didn't lift a finger. My parents spent all their savings to save her. To be honest, my dad's been out looking for odd jobs these past few days. That was one of the reasons I'd thought of them. Like my father, Megan's parents didn't favor boys over girls. They treated every child with the same importance and would sacrifice anything for them, even if it meant living a harder life themselves. I hadn't even mentioned the profit-sharing arrangement yet when Megan quickly added, "Don't worry, my parents would never reveal the shop's recipes. They'd just be working for your dad, getting their monthly wages. You focus on your studies. We'll make sure the shop is run well." With Megan as the bridge, my father soon reached an agreement with her parents. After teaching them the recipes in full, he handed the shop key to Megan's mother. "It's in your hands now. I'm going to be with my daughter while she's at school." By the time Megan told me this over the phone, my father was already on the train to my city. While he'd been away, I had rented him a place and bought all the equipment and supplies needed for a food stall. And so, in my first month at university, our stall became the most popular one outside campus. I hadn't expected to see David Grant again. It seemed he had gone out of his way to find out where I studied. One day, as I was leaving class to help at the stall, he blocked me at the school gate. At first glance, I almost didn't recognize the man who had once spent a lifetime with me. Before we married, he had been a clean-cut college student. After marriage, he never had to worry about food, clothing, or shelter. And even in old age, he had been a meticulous old man who cared about his appearance. But now, his beard was unshaven. Dark circles smudged his eyes, and his clothes, stained at the collar and cuffs, looked like they hadn't been washed in days. "Lynn, I was wrong," he said hoarsely. "Now I finally understand what a bastard I was in my last life. Please forgive me. Give me one more chance," he pleaded. "Let's live a good life together." A couple of days earlier, I had called Megan, and she'd filled me in on David's recent situation. About a week ago, a woman had shown up at his workplace. The moment they saw each other, David's face changed. No one knew what she said to him, but they started arguing right there at the office entrance. David was already unpopular, and normally, this sort of thing might have blown over if management never heard about it. But someone reported the incident to his boss, and his already dissatisfied superior seized the chance to give him a formal demerit. When David found out, it was like his mind snapped. He kept muttering, "Impossible, it's all fake." And then the higher-ups fired him. Based on what Megan told me, I guess the woman was probably Susan. Maybe she had finally realized that her childhood sweetheart wasn't a good man after all. Being someone who knew how to use men to her advantage, she must have thought of David, the man who had once been madly in love with her, and saw him out. Unfortunately for her, David, rattled by the stark contrast between her past and present behavior, had refused. It was clear David had taken a heavy blow. Even in the short time we'd been talking, I could see his mental state wasn't stable. Glancing at the steady flow of people passing by, I quietly took a step back. We've both been given another chance at life, I thought. Let's just let each other go. I already wasted one lifetime on you. There's no way I'll ever get entangled with you again in this one. Suddenly, David groaned in anguish and smacked himself in the face. "I'm a bastard, I wronged you. I didn't know how to cherish you. Lynn, what will it take for you to forgive me?" His raised voice started drawing attention, and I didn't want him ruining my life. I was trying to think of a way out when a voice sounded behind me. "Who are you?" The tone was sharp. "Why are you saying such vague things to ruin my girlfriend's reputation? What's your deal?" Zach's sudden appearance and words caught me completely off guard. David stared at him in shock before slowly turning his gaze back to me. "Lynn, who is he?" "You're my wife. How can you be tangled up with another man?" It was still early in the semester, so not many people at school knew me. But everyone knew Zach. Student council president, my direct superior. His appearance alone drew attention, and now that it seemed like he was involved in some romantic dispute, it only made more heads turn. Seeing the crowd slowly gathering around us, I felt both flustered and angry. Instinctively, I wanted Zach to step away from the scene. "Lynn, don't be afraid," Zach said firmly. "I've seen plenty of people like this. As long as I'm here, whatever he's trying to do will be useless." He stood protectively in front of me, raising his voice so everyone could hear as he questioned David's words with sharp clarity. People who had been looking at me strangely started to shift their opinions under Zach's influence. David's expression darkened. "Lynn, tell me yourself. Do you or do you not have a relationship with me?" Other than the fact that David had once come to my village for field work, there was nothing linking us in this life. No one knew we had been married in a previous one. So I put on a panicked expression and shouted, "I don't even know you. You show up and start saying all these strange things. What exactly do you want? I'm telling you, if you keep harassing me, I'll call the police." The school's security guard, seeing the growing crowd, had just come over when he heard me say harassment and police. Without a word, he turned and ran toward the nearby police station. It didn't take long before 2 officers arrived with the guard. The crowd instantly fell silent. David stared at me in disbelief. "Lynn, are you serious? I'm a professor. You're a rural woman who married me. What more do you want?" I didn't have to say another word. That single outburst made it obvious to everyone that there was something wrong with his head. The police led him away, but he kept looking back at me, shouting, "Lynn, tell them to let me go. I'm your husband. You can't do this to me." Zach finally spoke again, his tone steady. "I think everyone here can see it. This guy clearly has mental issues. Nothing he says is credible. Please, everyone, clear Lynn's name." Zach had a strong reputation at school, and the moment he said this, the crowd began speaking up. "Don't worry, we all know Lynn was just caught up in something she didn't deserve. No one's going to hold this against her. Lynn, don't be afraid. I remember that man's face. If he comes to bother you again, just shout. We'll all help you." As the crowd dispersed, I looked at Zach, who was walking at the very back and asked seriously about what I just said. "Do you have any thoughts?" Zach's tone hinted at something deeper. Remembering the words he'd thrown at David when he arrived, my face instantly heated. "I know you were just helping me out. Don't worry, I won't go around telling people." "No," Zach interrupted, his eyes full of amusement, but his expression completely serious. "Lynn, from the first moment I saw you, I liked you. Will you give me a chance to take care of you?" 2 lifetimes lived, and this was the first time someone had confessed to me so earnestly. My mind went blank. I was flustered for so long that I couldn't get a single word out. Seeing my awkwardness, Zach smiled gently, his expression softening even more. "I'm not forcing you to answer right now. Take as long as you need. I can wait." In my sophomore year, my father rented a small storefront right across from the school. With the help of my professors and Zach, I managed to start a small project and made what for this era was a decent amount of money. When Zach confessed to me for the 3rd time, I agreed to be with him. Unlike David, he respected me, gave me the support he could when I needed it, and knew how to give me strength when I was feeling worn out. As for David, I later overheard the school guard mentioning that his family had taken him home and admitted him to a mental hospital. Bookmark, after graduating from college, I started a small company with my classmates. Everything was moving in a good direction. Everything felt just right.